inevitably as Gestapo Müller. One of the most powerful men in Germany during the World War II and a direct subordinate of Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler, Müller simply disappeared in the chaos of Berlin in early May 1945, never to be seen again. Rumours abounded that the 45-year-old Müller had escaped to South America, perhaps in the company of the equally missing Martin Bormann, head of the Nazi Party organization and Hitler's personal secretary. Did Müller live on in Paraguay or Argentina, supported by the shadowy Odessa organization? Other rumors said that Müller fell into Soviet hands and was used for his intelligence sources and networks, until he outlived his usefulness. What happened to the head of the world's most infamous secret police force? So let's first establish what the Gestapo was. Its proper name was Geheime Staatspolizei, or Secret State Police. Created in 1933 by Hermann Göring, the Prime Minister of Prussia and later head of the Air Force, the Luftwaffe, it was initially limited to Prussia only, merging all previous security police agencies into one umbrella organization. In April 1934, Himmler, head of the SS, gained oversight over the Gestapo. It became a nationwide organization and subordinated to the security police, the ZIPO, alongside the criminal police. Just after the war began in September 1939, the Gestapo was administered by the Reich Main Security Office, a new organization headed by SS General Heinrich Müller. The Gestapo was officially Department 4 of the RSHA, and its sister organization was the SD, the Sicherheitsdienst, the SS Security Service. The Gestapo had multiple roles. Before the war, it investigated treason, espionage, sabotage, and criminal attacks on both the Nazi Party and Germany. After 1936, it operated without judicial review, meaning it was above the law. In September 1939, with the Gestapo's merger into the new RSHA under Heinrich Müller was appointed head of the Gestapo, responsible directly to Heinrich. Müller remained Gestapo head until the end of the war. His direct subordinate was Lieutenant Colonel Adolf Eichmann, who became head of the Office of Jewish Affairs, organizing the mass deportations of European Jews to the concentration camps. The Gestapo spread its influence across occupied Europe, and its Department D was responsible for security operations against resistance groups, Allied spy networks, POW escape organizations, and the roundups of Jews and other enemies of the state. Its personnel were uniformed depending on their jobs and roles, with many agents wearing civilian clothing, most famously the long black leather trench coat and fedora hat. The Gestapo was not SS, but subordinated to it, although their uniform resembled the SS, but without the lightning runes on the right collar patch. And they also wore police-pattern shoulder boards. Many officers were nonetheless honorary SS officers as well. On the left sleeve was a diamond with the letters SD for Sicherheitsdienst. So who was Heinrich Müller? Müller was a smallish, dapper man with piercing grey-blue eyes. If the devil manufactured administrators, then Müller would have been the show model. Ruthless and efficient, Müller even unsettled senior SS officers with his quiet presence. One SS general who was investigated by him recalling, quote, "My first impression of him was one of cold curiosity and extreme reserve," unquote. Müller was an extremely able organizer and a man driven by his work and not the ideology that underpinned it. In fact, Müller had been a serious opponent of Nazism, who ironically ended up commanding Nazi Germany's most feared police organization. Born into a lower-middle-class police official's family in Bavaria in 1900, Müller had been an apprentice aircraft technician until World War I broke out. During the war, he became a highly decorated pilot of artillery observation planes on the Western Front, being awarded the Iron Cross first and second class. In 1919, he joined the Munich police, rising swiftly through the ranks to become head of the political police department. In this capacity, he vigorously suppressed communists, whom he personally loathed, and was none too enamored with Nazis either, describing Hitler as, quote, that unemployed house painter, unquote, and, quote, Austrian draft dodger, unquote. How then did someone like Müller end up working for the Nazis? The answer is pragmatism. Not his, but that of Reinhard Heydrich, Himmler's number 2. After the Nazis came to power in January 1933, Heydrich invited Müller to work for him in the fledgling Gestapo. Heydrich recognized that someone of Müller's ruthlessness and capacity for work, as well as his professional police background, was essential. The move was very unpopular with many Nazis, but Heydrich got his way. By November 1941, Müller was an SS Gruppenführer or general and a lieutenant general of police. He remained divorced from ideology, simply carrying out state policy to the best of his abilities, the coldly efficient administrator of the Gestapo. Following Heydrich's assassination in 1942, Müller's new boss at the RSHA was Dr. Ernst Kaltenbrunner, a tall, scar-faced Austrian. Müller attended the infamous 1943 Wannsee Conference to decide the final solution to the Jewish question. He also investigated the assassination attempt on Hitler's life of the 20th of July 1944 that resulted in a huge roundup and many trials and executions. He remained faithfully at his post until the end of the regime. Gestapo headquarters was located at number 8 Prinz Albrechtstrasse in central Berlin, within the RSHA building. This building had been badly damaged in an Allied air raid in January 1945, destroying all of the extensive library of files held within. Müller and the senior Gestapo leadership then operated from other premises until the direct Soviet attack on Berlin forced them into bunkers in the city center. Müller was present in Hitler's bunker during the last days of the battle, while his boss, Dr. Kaltenbrunner, had already fled to the Austrian Tyrol to hide out in the mountains. Müller evidently realized that the end of the war was close when he said to another bunker occupant who survived the war, quote, "We know the Russian methods exactly. I haven't the faintest intention of being taken prisoner by the Russians," unquote. But he nonetheless remained in the Führer bunker until the very end. When Himmler's liaison officer at Führer headquarters, SS Gruppenführer Hermann Fegelein, attempted to abscond after Hitler discovered that Himmler was secretly negotiating to surrender Germany to the Western Allies behind his back, Müller was directed to interrogate Fegelein when he was recaptured in a drunken state on the 27th of April 1945. Fegelein was shot the next day. It appears that with Kaltenbrunner's disappearance, Müller assumed temporary command of the RSHA as well. Was this why he still hung around in Berlin? Because of the collection of more power? One of Hitler's secretaries, Traudl Junge, and the bunker telephonist SS Oberscharführer Rokus Misch both said after the war that they had seen Müller in the Führer bunker or nearby Reichschancellery basement on the 30th of April, the day that Hitler committed suicide. Müller was still in his full SS general's uniform. Müller was last positively identified in the Führer bunker on the evening of the 1st of May 1945, as the occupants prepared to make breakout attempts on foot to reach the American front line west of encircled Berlin. It seems that Müller did not join any of the several breakout groups that left the bunker that night. He simply disappeared without trace. Obviously, the head of the Gestapo was a hunted war criminal from the end of the war and would also have been a valuable asset for any of the Allied intelligence agencies if they could have apprehended him alive. In the 2 years after the war, a joint Anglo-American espionage organization called the Counterintelligence War Room hunted for information about the fate of Müller. It interrogated senior RSHA officers. All the other RSHA officials it hunted were caught, all except Müller. The British and Americans concluded that Müller had not fled to the southern Alps like Kaltenbrunner and many other senior SS, but had remained in Berlin to the end. One of the problems faced was Müller's name. Heinrich Müller is a very common German name. In fact, there was even another SS general with the exact same name. One story to emerge was that Müller had changed his name to Schwarz or Schwarzer and fled south from Berlin with a Gestapo official called Christian Schulz, but neither man could be found. Interestingly, Müller had last been seen in the upper bunker talking to Schulz on the 1st of May 1945. In 1947, Müller's mistress, Anna Schmid, was questioned and her home searched twice. Nothing, no clues as to Müller's fate. US intelligence concluded that Müller was dead. But the plot thickened. SS Brigadeführer Walter Schellenberg, Himmler's chief spy, who cooperated with Allied intelligence during the Nuremberg trials, reported in 1950 that a German officer he had met, who had been held as a prisoner in the Soviet Union, had seen Müller in prison in Moscow in 1948. This unnamed German claimed Müller died in captivity shortly afterwards. But Schellenberg's story could not be corroborated, and Schellenberg himself died of cancer shortly afterwards. With Adolf Eichmann's dramatic kidnapping from Argentina by Israeli intelligence in 1960, the hunt for Müller's fate was revived. Many people believe Müller was still alive, somewhere in South America. The West German authorities were investigating leads. They didn't subscribe to the theory that Müller had been working for the Soviets since 1945. They closely watched Müller's relatives and his former secretary. His former mistress told West German investigators that she had last seen Müller on the 24th of April 1945. He had given her a vial of cyanide as a parting gift. Interestingly, it had been noted that Müller had not joined one of the breakout groups from the Führer bunker on the night of the 1st of May. One witness said that Müller had refused, saying, quote, "The regime has fallen and I fall also," unquote. He was, as I said, last positively seen in the company of Gestapo radio specialist Christian Schulz, whose own body was also never found or at least identified, suggesting perhaps that Müller and Schulz left the bunker together that night. However, the West German investigators had three potential sources that could explain Müller's fate. The first was the testimony of Fritz Leopold, who in 1945 had been a Berlin morgue official. He had made a report in December 1945 that Müller's body had been recovered from the bomb-damaged RSHA headquarters building on Prinz Albrechtstrasse after the Battle of Berlin, a distance of only 1 kilometer from Hitler's bunker, and along with many others ordered buried by the Soviets in a grave in a cemetery on Lilienstrasse in the west of Berlin. Leopold said that identity papers in the name of Heinrich Müller had been found on the body. The West Germans dismissed Leopold as unreliable, though the burial was registered with Berlin authorities, and incredibly a headstone was placed on it by Müller's children. The second source was senior Gestapo officer Heinz Panwitz. Turned over to the Soviets by the Americans after he was captured in Austria at the end of the war, Panwitz came home from Moscow in 1957. He told the West German intelligence agency that the Soviets had told him that Müller was dead. They had found Müller's body in May 1945 in a subway entrance a few blocks from the Reich Chancellery. He had shot himself through the head. Soviet investigators had found Müller's identity papers on the corpse. The last source of information came from a Volkssturm or Home Guard soldier named Walter Lüders. He said that in May 1945 he had been in charge of a burial unit ordered by the Soviets to clear up bodies around the ruined Reich Chancellery area. Lüders said one body had stood out. It wore an SS General's uniform. Though the uniform carried no medals or decorations, it did have identity papers in the name of Heinrich Müller. The body was later moved to a cemetery in the Soviet sector of Berlin and interred in a mass grave. In 1955, the German Armed Forces Information Office had made a request to the East German authorities about information concerning Müller, and an official confirmed that Gestapo Müller had been buried in East Berlin in a mass grave. But of course corroboration was impossible, and also the source was communist and therefore suspicious in the eyes of the West. Being thorough, the West Germans first checked out the Fritz Leopold story, there being an actual grave with a headstone. In 1963 an exhumation order was made, but when the grave was excavated, the remains of 3 people were found, not 1, and none of the bones matched Müller's height or build. The other 2 stories, those of Panwitz and Lüders, could not be corroborated. Lüders' alleged grave for Müller was on the wrong side of the Berlin Wall. Next, the CIA became involved. In 1961, Richard Goleniewski, a senior Polish intelligence officer, defected to the West. He revealed several moles in Western military intelligence. He said in 1948-52 that he had been an interrogator of captured Nazi officials in Poland. He claimed that the KGB had captured Müller sometime in the early 1950s and taken him to Moscow. This contradicted Panwitz's testimony, the Soviets having told him that Müller had died in Berlin in May 1945. It also went against Schellenberg's story that had Müller dying in Moscow in 1948. The CIA tried to find more evidence. The Israelis too were hunting for Müller. In 1967, 2 of their agents were caught by West German police breaking into Müller's wife's Munich apartment. Plenty of disinformation came from behind the Iron Curtain as well, further muddying the search for Müller. The CIA investigation ended in December 1971, no closer to an answer. However, in 2008, German historian Peter Longerich published a biography of Heinrich Himmler, claiming that Müller was in fact with Himmler at Flensburg on the 11th of May 1945, during Grand Admiral Karl Dönnitz's rump Nazi government in northern Germany. Dönitz, who was Hitler's nominated successor, managed to run a small enclave in northern Germany as a Nazi state for a few weeks after the surrender of Germany itself. The story of this strange state of affairs is covered in another of my videos. See the end screen for a link. Professor Longerich stated that Müller accompanied Himmler during his final attempt to head south from Flensburg through British lines to southern Germany that resulted in Himmler's capture and later suspicious death in British hands. Müller, he claimed, left Himmler's party at the town of Meinstadt and subsequently disappeared. However, Longerich doesn't say where this information came from, and has no explanation for how Müller managed to get out of Berlin on the 1st to 2nd of May 1945, when nearly all the other Führerbunker personnel failed to achieve this and were captured by the Soviets or killed themselves attempting to escape. In 2013, according to newspapers, Müller's fate was apparently solved. German professor Johannes Tuchel claimed that Müller's body was found in May 1945, identified by papers on the body, and first buried in the garden of the Air Ministry, a complex of buildings a stone's throw from the old Gestapo headquarters. This body was then transferred to another cemetery in August 1945 and buried in a mass grave where it lies today. The source for this information? The 2 aforementioned Germans who were members of burial parties, clearing up bodies around the Reich Chancellery area in May 1945. Tuchel discovered some old archival documents to support the stories. This body is interred with 2,700 others in one of 16 mass graves. Where? Berlin's Old Jewish Cemetery, the same place the East German authorities confirmed to the West Germans in writing in 1955 as Heinrich Müller's burial place. Could it be that the feared head of the Gestapo and the man who administered the Holocaust now lies in a Jewish cemetery? We may never know, as exhumation is forbidden by Jewish religious laws. We can, based on the scanty evidence available, suggest 2 possible solutions to the mystery of what happened to Heinrich Müller. There is circumstantial evidence that Müller indeed died in Berlin on the 1st or 2nd of May 1945. A body dressed in an SS General's uniform, which Müller was still wearing when he was last seen alive, was identified at least twice, if not 3 times, if one believes Walter Schellenberg's story, each time by low-ranking personnel who would not have known who Müller was. Each time, identity papers were found. The location for one sighting was close to or in the ruins of Müller's old headquarters. The other two identifications placed the corpse in the vicinity of the building in the Reich Chancellery's area. I've walked the route myself. The distance from the Führerbunker to where Gestapo headquarters once stood is about 1 kilometer, a walk of around 13 minutes under safe modern conditions. Müller was last seen with one of his senior officials, Schultz, in the Führerbunker on the night of the 1st of May 1945, when the other bunker personnel broke out. Obviously, Müller could not have brought civilian clothes and other escape paraphernalia into the Führerbunker. Hermann Fegelein, whom he had interrogated, had been shot for attempting such an escape. Where better to have an escape kit, money, mobile wealth, etc. stashed than his old headquarters building just 1 kilometer away? We could theorize that Müller left the Führerbunker on the night of the 1st of May, perhaps in company with Schultz, and headed for Gestapo headquarters on Prinz Albrechtstrasse. On the way, he removed his decorations and medal ribbon bar from his uniform, perhaps to take them with him into hiding, the uniform itself to be ditched. But something happened that compelled Müller to kill himself before he changed out of his uniform. Perhaps Red Army troops were close by in the ruins, and he feared imminent capture, something he was not prepared to accept, as he had said. Did he in fact shoot himself, like Gestapo official Panwitz reported the Soviets saying to him, or perhaps take poison? We know Müller had cyanide on his person because he gave a vial of it to his girlfriend on the 24th of April. All the senior Nazis were carrying poison at this stage of the end of the war. The other two reports of Müller's body do not mention a visible cause of death, suggesting cyanide poisoning. The spot where the body was reported to have been temporarily buried, the Air Ministry Garden, is just down the street from Gestapo headquarters. In fact, it's closer to Gestapo headquarters than to the Führerbunker. So what happened to his medals? Perhaps they were taken as souvenirs by Red Army troops, or kept by the German burial detail, as they had some value. One report has them being returned anonymously to Müller's family after the war, but this is impossible to corroborate. In this scenario, the failure of anyone to find Christian Schultz after the war suggests that he died with Müller, and his body too ended up in the old Jewish cemetery mass burials. There are 2 points to raise about this scenario. Firstly, on the 1st of May, Red Army forces had captured Gestapo headquarters and the Air Ministry building, along with most of the area around the Reich Chancellery. But German troops did continue to hold out in many pockets of territory and individual buildings in the area, as well as the U-Bahn underground railway system. Slipping through the chaos of combat and burning buildings to reach the area of Gestapo headquarters would not have been impossible in the fluidity of street fighting and at night. The Soviets planned to assault the Reich Chancellery on the 2nd of May, and by then the Führerbunker occupants planned to be long gone. One point about the scenario that I've outlined raises the possibility that the body in the SS General's uniform was a plant. What better way to cover your tracks and prevent anyone looking for you than to have apparently died? Due to Müller's great power, even in the dying days of Nazi Germany, he could have fairly easily had his minions procure a corpse of the same approximate height, age and weight, and had it dressed in one of his uniforms and dumped close to his headquarters to ensure it would be found, identification aided by a set of Müller's papers conveniently placed in the pocket. This might explain why Müller was wearing his decorations and medal ribbons the last time he was seen in the bunker on the 1st of May, but they were missing from the tunic of the corpse identified as Müller a few days later. When tunics had cleaned, decorations were removed and pinned to the uniform that was to be worn that day by his orderly. Did someone take one of Müller's spare, clean uniforms from his baggage to adorn the corpse, but didn't replicate the decorations because Müller was still wearing them until the last minute? It may sound like something out of a Jack Higgins novel, but effecting a body switch would not have been difficult. A further point is that the corpse's head was intact. No effort had been made to destroy the facial features or dentition, which probably would have drawn more suspicion to the corpse than if it had been left intact in the street with the identification papers. You have to remember that a battle was still raging in central Berlin. The Soviets had yet to capture the Führerbunker and the Reich Chancellery, and the Schmiersch counterintelligence detachment was searching primarily for Hitler and other very senior Nazis such as Martin Bormann and Josef Goebbels. The Soviet priority was to locate the most senior Nazis' bodies, or at least to explain what had become of them. Heinrich Müller was, of course, 2 rungs down the food chain from Himmler and Hitler. The second scenario is Müller's successful escape from Berlin on the 1st to 2nd of May 1945, a feat accomplished by few from the Führerbunker. Only with great luck and daring did Hitler Youth leader Arthur Axmann manage to get through the Soviet lines to the US zone. Of course, Müller, as head of the Gestapo, had access to enormous resources and great numbers of people to ensure his escape. But the fact of his hanging around in Berlin to the bitter end, while his boss and many of his subordinates actually fled in good time into hiding in Austria and elsewhere, suggests Müller was caught off guard by the sudden speed of the Soviet encirclement of the city and the collapse of German resistance. If Müller did get away, neither hide nor hair of him was ever heard from again. Investigations by US, British, Israeli, and German intelligence organizations never found a single piece of credible evidence that he lived after the 1st of May 1945. But with someone as wily and organized as Heinrich Müller, never say never. An outsider to the Nazi establishment for his whole career, he would have had little desire to socialize with ideological Nazis in hiding in South America. Perhaps he lived out the last years somewhere in complete anonymity. As we can't dig up 2,700 bodies of the old Jewish cemetery to find Müller and positively identify him with DNA, we are left with little but intelligent guesswork and supposition in this intriguing mystery. One final word about Heinrich Müller. He and Reinhard Heydrich often played chess together, and Heydrich commented